I remember the night I first saw her face on my screen. It was late, one of those nights when sleep feels impossible and you're left scrolling through endless profiles, faces blending into each other until nothing feels real. Most of them looked the same to me, forced smiles, bios filled with cliches, and the same rehearsed lines about loving coffee or hiking. I was close to closing the app altogether when I stopped at hers. Something about her wasn't staged. Her smile wasn't perfect, it was soft, almost shy, the kind that didn't try to sell itself but still drew me in. And in her bio, just a single line from a book I had carried with me for years. That tiny detail hit me harder than I expected, as if she had written it for me to find. I stared at her photo longer than I should have, heart beating faster, wondering if this would be like all the other times, swiping right, matching, and then watching the spark die out in a sea of small talk and half-hearted replies. But this time felt different. Against my better judgment, I messaged her. Something simple, but honest, not another tired joke. I told her I recognized the quote in her bio and asked what it meant to her. When she replied, it wasn't a one-word answer. She didn't brush it off. She told me a story, personal, thoughtful, and warm, and before I knew it we were exchanging message after message, falling into a rhythm that didn't feel forced. Hours passed like minutes, and when she laughed at one of my clumsy jokes, I swear I could almost hear it through the screen. She asked questions that showed she was really listening, not just passing time. She wanted to know what made me happy, what I was afraid of, what I dreamed about when nobody else was around. And I found myself telling her things I never shared with strangers. I told her about the way I write to calm my restless mind, about the time I stood under the rain just to feel something pure, about the ache of wanting to be seen for who I am. She didn't run. She stayed. The idea of meeting her in person came up faster than I expected. I hesitated, remembering how many times I had felt hopeful only to watch it crumble into awkward silences or polite goodbyes that meant nothing. But when she suggested we meet, something inside me said yes before my fear could intervene. We set a time, a place, nothing extravagant, just a quiet cafe not far from where I lived. The night before, I couldn't sleep. My body was restless, my mind replaying her words, her smile, the way she seemed to see through me even from behind a screen. I stood in front of the mirror longer than I care to admit, trying to choose clothes that made me feel like myself, not some version I thought she wanted. Every outfit felt wrong at first, as though I was rehearsing for a part in a play. But then I stopped. I remembered how she made me feel when we talked, unpolished, unpretentious, real. So I chose something simple. Not to impress, but to feel comfortable enough to be honest. When morning came, I was all nerves. My hands shook as I brushed my hair, and on the train I kept rehearsing what I'd say when I saw her. Would we hug? Would it be awkward? Would she recognize me instantly? 100 questions chased each other in my head, but underneath all that chaos, there was something else, a spark of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. It was fragile, like glass, but it was there, and it scared me how much I wanted it to last. By the time I stepped off the train and saw the cafe sign ahead, my stomach twisted in knots. I checked my phone again, half expecting her to cancel, to say something had come up, the way it always seemed to happen in my past. But her message was already there. I'm here. Can't wait to see you. Simple words, but they stopped me in my tracks. My breath caught, my heart raced, and in that moment I realized this wasn't just another date. It already felt like the beginning of something I couldn't quite name, but desperately wanted to believe in. The moment I pushed the cafe door open, the sound of clinking cups and low chatter filled the air, but none of it mattered because my eyes found her almost instantly. She was sitting near the window, a cup in front of her, both hands wrapped around it as if she needed the warmth to calm her own nerves. She looked up at me and for a second everything around me blurred. She smiled, and it wasn't the kind of polite smile people give out of habit. It was slow, genuine, the kind that made me feel as though she had been waiting for me, and only me, to arrive. My legs felt unsteady, like the floor was thinner under my feet, but I forced myself forward, every step carrying the weight of weeks of doubt and hope tangled together. When I reached her table, she stood up, and for a moment we just looked at each other, as if confirming that the person we had built in our minds was real. Then came a hug, hesitant at first, but soft and lingering just enough to quiet the storm inside me. Her perfume was subtle, something floral and clean, and the warmth of her body pressed against mine felt like a reassurance that I didn't know I was craving. We pulled apart, both of us a little awkward, both of us laughing nervously, and sat down across from each other. My hands wanted to fidget, but I gripped the edge of my cup instead, grounding myself in the heat of it. Conversation came easier than I expected. It wasn't forced, it wasn't a checklist of questions like so many dates before. She asked me about my morning, about the train ride, and somehow even those small things felt alive when spoken between us. When I asked about her week, her eyes lit up as she described the book she was reading, the project she was working on at her job, the silly fight she had with her roommate over laundry. She told stories with her whole body, her hands moving, her eyes expressive, her laughter breaking through in ways that made my chest tighten. I found myself watching her more than I should, memorizing the curve of her lips when she smiled, the way she tilted her head slightly when she listened. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, it was the way she seemed present, like every word I said mattered enough for her to hold on to. At one point I spilled a bit of coffee on the table, my nerves getting the better of me, and I flushed with embarrassment. But instead of laughing at me, she reached over with a napkin, brushing my hand gently in the process. That small touch sent a current through me, so quick and sharp that I had to catch my breath. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, but she smiled softly and said, "Relax, it's just coffee." Her tone wasn't teasing, it was kind, and in that moment I felt more at ease than I had in months. We talked for what felt like hours. About childhood memories, about family expectations, about the confusing journey of growing into ourselves. She shared pieces of her past that were both light and heavy, and I found myself leaning in, not wanting to miss a single detail. When I opened up about the struggles I'd faced, how it felt to hide parts of myself, the weight of pretending, the fear of never being accepted, she didn't look away. Her eyes held mine steady, and there was no pity in them, only understanding. That look alone gave me more comfort than any words could. There were moments of silence too, but they weren't uncomfortable. They felt natural, as though silence itself was a language we were both fluent in. She would take a sip of her drink and glance out the window, and I would follow her gaze, feeling the quiet like a soft blanket over both of us. It struck me how rare that was, how often silence on a first date felt like failure, like proof that there was no connection. But here, silence was safe. Silence was alive. When the conversation picked up again, it was easy and unguarded. She teased me gently about the way I spoke with my hands, I teased her about how seriously she took her coffee order. We laughed, not the polite kind but the deep kind that comes from a place of comfort. I caught myself thinking that I hadn't laughed like this in years, not in a way that felt so unforced, so uncalculated. It scared me a little, how quickly she was pulling me into her orbit, but it also felt like the most natural thing in the world. The cafe began to fill, the noise growing louder, but we hardly noticed. We leaned closer across the table without realizing it, drawn in by something unspoken. I watched the way her fingers tapped lightly against the rim of her cup, and for some reason, I wanted to hold her hand right there, as though that small gesture could anchor the entire universe in place. I didn't, of course. Fear held me back. But the thought lingered, warm and terrifying at the same time. By the time we realized how long we had been sitting there, the sun had shifted outside the window, the light softer and golden. Neither of us seemed ready to say goodbye. I suggested we take a walk, and when she agreed, the relief washed over me like a tide. As we stood and gathered our things, her arm brushed mine again, and this time I didn't pull away. We walked out together, side by side, into a world that suddenly felt brighter simply because she was in it. The air outside felt cooler than I expected, carrying the faint scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. We walked side by side without any clear destination, letting our steps choose the path while our words filled the spaces between us. At first it was light, easy conversation about the neighborhood, about how she loved the little bookstore tucked between two cafes, about how I always managed to get lost even with maps on my phone. But then, as though we had both silently agreed to peel back another layer, the conversation shifted into deeper places. She told me about her first crush, how confusing it was to realize she didn't feel the same way about boys as everyone around her seemed to. I could hear the tremor in her voice, but also the strength it took to say it aloud. I listened, nodding, my heart aching with recognition, because her story mirrored parts of mine. When she looked at me with those steady eyes, it was an invitation to share, and I felt my defenses loosen without effort. I spoke about the years I spent pretending, about the careful ways I had shaped myself to fit what was expected. The nights I cried quietly, terrified of what would happen if anyone knew the truth about who I loved. I admitted the loneliness that clung to me even in rooms full of people, the fear that I would always be hiding, always be apologizing for existing. My voice shook, my chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. She walked beside me in silence, listening so fully it made me want to weep. It wasn't pity in her eyes, it was understanding, the kind that makes you feel less alone in the world. We wandered into that little bookstore she had mentioned, a place filled with uneven shelves and the smell of old paper. She led me down the aisles, her fingers brushing over spines as though greeting old friends. She pulled a book down, one she said she had read 3 times, and pressed it into my hands with a smile. I flipped through it, not really reading, just soaking in the fact that she wanted to share something important with me. We stood there, shoulder to shoulder, in a quiet corner, and for the first time I realized how natural it felt to exist in the same space as her. Not like strangers fumbling through a first date, but like two people who had always been meant to find each other. As we left the store and continued walking, our conversation slipped into dreams and fears. She confessed that she sometimes felt too much, that her sensitivity made her feel like she was fragile in a world that demanded hardness. I found myself telling her things I had never told anyone, that I write late at night not just for peace but because it feels like the only time I can hear my own heart. That I've always been afraid of being forgotten, of living a life too small to matter. Saying it out loud made me vulnerable, but the way she looked at me made me believe it wasn't weakness. She said softly, "I don't think you could ever be forgotten," and the sincerity in her voice made me turn away, blinking against the sting in my eyes. The sky had started to dim, streaks of gold giving way to the softness of twilight. We sat down on a bench by the river, the water glinting with the last light of the day. There was a comfortable quiet between us, the kind that didn't need to be filled. I wanted to reach for her hand but instead pressed my palms together in my lap, trying to calm the storm inside me. She tilted her head, studying me with a half-smile, and asked what I was thinking. I almost laughed at the question, because how could I tell her I was thinking of how her presence had already shifted something deep inside me? Instead, I said, "I'm just glad I met you," and her smile grew softer, almost tender, as though she understood what I couldn't put into words. When the time came to part, neither of us wanted to move. We lingered, making excuses for why we should stay just a little longer, pointing out the way the lights reflected on the water, or how the evening air felt so calming. But eventually we stood, walking back toward the station together. At the entrance, we paused, both searching for the right way to say goodbye without closing the door on what had begun. She leaned in and wrapped me in a hug that was firmer than the first, longer, warmer, and in that moment I felt a mix of comfort and longing that made it hard to let go. As she pulled back, she whispered, almost like a secret, "I'm really glad too." Her words echoed in my mind long after she turned and walked away. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding as though it knew something my mind was too afraid to admit. For the first time in a very long time, I felt seen, and the thought of losing that terrified me as much as it thrilled me. The walk home that night felt strangely weightless, as if the city around me had lost some of its edges. The traffic still rushed by, people still hurried past, but none of it touched me. My head was full of her, her smile when she looked at me across the table, the way her voice softened when she admitted her fears, the warmth of her hug lingering on my skin like an imprint. By the time I reached my apartment, I was already replaying every moment in a loop, searching for hidden meanings, for clues that maybe she had felt the same spark I did. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and lay on the bed without turning on the lights, the glow of my phone screen the only brightness in the room. A part of me wanted to message her right away, to tell her again how much I had enjoyed the evening, but fear made me hesitate. I didn't want to come off as too eager, too desperate, so I waited, clutching the phone in my hand like it could steady the pounding in my chest. When her message finally came, simple and sweet, "I had a really nice time tonight, thank you," I couldn't stop the smile from spreading across my face. I typed back quickly, then deleted, then typed again, agonizing over every word. I settled on honesty, short and unpolished, "Me too, I'm glad we met." I stared at the screen, watching the little bubble that meant she was typing, only for it to disappear again. My heart sank a little, but I told myself she was just busy, that it didn't mean anything. I put the phone down on the nightstand and rolled onto my side, but sleep didn't come easily. My thoughts circled endlessly, pulled between hope and doubt. The next morning, I woke up with the first impulse to check my phone. Nothing new. I tried to distract myself with coffee, with chores, with work, but my attention kept slipping back to the silence. Every vibration made me jump, only to realize it wasn't her. I reminded myself that people had lives, that not everyone stared at their phones the way I did, but it didn't quiet the sting of waiting. As hours stretched into a full day without another message, old feelings returned, the familiar ache of wondering if I had been too open, if I had shared too much too soon, if I had scared her away. I found myself scrolling through the app again, the same endless parade of profiles that suddenly felt even more empty than before. The same hollow smiles, the same phrases copied from one bio to another, none of them holding the same weight her words had carried. It struck me how exhausting it all had become, how months of swiping and chatting had left me feeling drained, as though I was running in circles chasing something that always slipped away. That night I sat in front of my phone, thumb hovering over the app, tempted to delete it entirely. But fear whispered in my ear, what if she messaged me tomorrow? What if she was just nervous, just as unsure as I was? Closing the app would feel like closing the door on a possibility, however fragile. I tried to remind myself that one date didn't have to mean everything. I tried to be rational, to lower my expectations, but my heart refused to cooperate. Every memory from that night pushed its way to the front of my mind. The way she listened without judgment, the way silence felt easy between us, the way her eyes lingered just a little too long on mine. It was impossible not to believe it had meant something more. Yet as the silence stretched on, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest, the old doubts whispering louder with every hour. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe she had walked away from that night with nothing more than a pleasant evening, while I was left holding the weight of something far greater, lying in bed again, phone beside me like an unwanted companion. I realized how much I had grown tired of this cycle, hope sparking, silence dimming it, and me caught in the middle, trying to hold on to something fragile. The apps had promised connection, but most days they felt like a cruel trick. A carousel of fleeting conversations that left me lonelier than before. Still, part of me clung to the memory of her, to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The second day after our date arrived, and I carried my phone everywhere like it was a lifeline. Every buzz made my chest leap, every silence made it sink. I kept rereading her last message, the one where she said she had a nice time, as if scanning it enough times might reveal something I had missed, a hidden sign that she wanted more. I typed out a message several times, long ones full of my feelings, short ones just asking how her day was, but each time I erased them before hitting send. I didn't want to seem clingy, didn't want to push her away before anything had a chance to grow. Still, the quiet from her side gnawed at me, a slow erosion of the hope I had been holding on to. By the evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself that honesty was better than games, that I had nothing to lose by speaking my heart. So I sent a message, nothing dramatic, just enough to let her know she mattered. Thank you again for last night. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, and I'd like to see you again if you'd like that too. My fingers trembled as I pressed send, and the moment it was gone, a wave of regret and fear crashed over me. I stared at the screen, waiting for those 3 little dots to appear, waiting for her to answer right away, because in my mind, if she felt even a fraction of what I did, she would respond instantly. But the dots never came. An hour passed. Then another. I told myself she was busy, maybe she was out with friends or had left her phone in another room. But when I climbed into bed and still hadn't heard back, my chest tightened with disappointment. Sleep came fitfully, broken by moments of waking up and checking my phone in the dark, only to find the same empty screen. By morning, the ache was sharper. I went through the motions of my day, smiling at coworkers, answering emails, making small talk, but underneath it all my mind kept drifting back to her silence. It felt like a heavy stone pressing down on me, one I carried everywhere I went. Memories of other times started to resurface, uninvited. The times when someone had seemed interested only to vanish without a word, the times I had let myself hope and then been left with nothing but unanswered messages and confusion. I hated how familiar it all felt, hated how quickly my heart jumped to the same old questions. Was I too open? Did I share too much? Did I make myself too available? I replayed our date in my head, searching for some moment where I might have said the wrong thing or revealed too much of myself. My mind was merciless, twisting every detail into a possible mistake. That evening I tried to distract myself. I picked up a book, but the words blurred on the page. I turned on music, but every song seemed to echo my longing. I even opened the app again, swiping through faces just to feel something, but none of them stirred me. They felt hollow, meaningless compared to the way I felt with her. It struck me then just how tired I was of all of it, of chasing connections that fizzled out, of giving pieces of myself to people who didn't seem to know how to hold them. Yet at the same time, I couldn't stop caring. I couldn't simply turn off the part of me that still wanted her to reply. On the third morning, just when I was starting to give up, a message appeared. Short. Polite. Hey, sorry for the delay. It was really nice meeting you too. I hope you've had a good week. I read it over and over, searching for warmth that wasn't there, trying to convince myself it meant she wanted to see me again, even though the words didn't say it. The relief of hearing from her mixed with the sting of knowing it wasn't the reply I had been hoping for. It was kindness, yes, but distant, like she was keeping me at arm's length. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a reminder that wanting someone and being wanted back in the same way were not always the same thing. Still, I tried to hold on to hope. I told myself maybe she was cautious, maybe she needed time, maybe she wasn't ready to open up the way I was. But beneath those justifications was a quiet voice whispering the truth I didn't want to admit. If someone really wants you, you don't have to chase them. You don't have to beg for their attention or wait days for a simple reply. I tried to drown that voice out, tried to silence it with excuses, but deep down it rang clear. That night I sat alone in my room, phone on the table, the dating apps glowing from the screen. For the first time, I began to ask myself if this cycle was worth it. If constantly offering my heart to people who barely held it for a moment was doing me more harm than good. And yet, even with that realization heavy in my chest, I couldn't bring myself to let go. Not yet. Not when the memory of her laugh, her eyes, and the way she made me feel still lingered so vividly in my mind. When her reply finally arrived, I must have read it 20 times, as if turning the words over and over would reveal something hidden beneath them. It was kind, yes, but distant, stripped of the warmth I had felt in her presence. The sentences were neat, polite, and careful, the way you might write to a coworker you barely know. My chest tightened as I held the phone, wishing for more. I wanted to see excitement between the lines, some eagerness that matched the pounding in my chest, but all I found was a softness that felt too measured. It was like she had opened the door just a crack, enough to be friendly, but not enough to let me inside. Still, a part of me clung to it, desperate for hope, convincing myself that maybe she was shy, maybe she was scared, maybe she just needed time. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt before, recognized the signs. I had seen this kind of message before, the one that tried to be kind without making promises, the one that gave you enough to hold on to but not enough to build a future with. I set the phone down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling, my mind spiraling. Memories of the night we shared came rushing back, the way her eyes had softened when she listened to me talk, the way she made silence feel safe, the way her laugh had wrapped around me like sunlight. That night had felt like something rare, like a connection I hadn't stumbled across in years, and now it seemed like I had been alone in feeling it so deeply. The thought burned. Was I so desperate for love that I had imagined the spark? Had I projected my longing onto her and convinced myself it was mutual? The self-doubt gnawed at me, making me question not just the date, but myself, my worth, my ability to see reality clearly. For the next few days, I tried to keep the conversation alive, sending her small messages, pieces of my day, light questions she could easily answer. Her replies always came late, always short, always polite. She never ignored me outright, but the rhythm between us was gone. It was like playing music with someone who refused to pick up their instrument, leaving me to carry the tune alone. Each message I sent felt heavier than the last, and each of her replies felt like a gentle push backward, as though she didn't want to hurt me but couldn't bring herself to let me close either. I found myself staring at the apps again, scrolling half-heartedly through faces that blurred into one another. None of them stirred anything in me. They felt hollow, pale echoes compared to the memory of her. I caught myself wondering why I kept putting myself through this cycle, of hope, of silence, of disappointment. It felt like I was searching for something I couldn't name, something the apps promised but never delivered. I thought about how easy it would be to delete them, to step off this carousel of fleeting connections, but each time I hesitated. What if the next person was different? What if the one person meant for me was just a swipe away? That fear of missing out held me prisoner, even as the exhaustion seeped deeper into my bones. Late one night, I pulled out my journal, the one I used when my mind felt too crowded. I wrote about her. About the way I had felt so alive sitting across from her, about the ache that came with her silence, about the way I kept trying to hold on to someone who wasn't reaching back. The words spilled out like water breaking through a dam, raw and unfiltered. By the end of it, my hands ached, and my eyes burned with tears I hadn't realized I was holding back. I closed the journal and sat in the quiet, feeling both emptied and heavy at the same time. Her messages continued in the same rhythm, kind but distant, present but absent. It became clear that I was standing at a crossroads. I could keep chasing, keep bending myself to hold on to something that was slipping away, or I could let go, painful as it might be, and face the emptiness that came with it. The choice wasn't easy. I wanted so badly for her to want me back, to match the fire I felt, to prove that I hadn't imagined the magic of that night. But deep down, beneath all the noise of my longing, was a quiet truth I couldn't ignore. I deserved more than half-hearted replies. I deserved someone who didn't make me question my worth with every silence. That truth scared me, because accepting it meant facing the possibility of being alone again, of starting over, of rebuilding hope from scratch. But as I lay in bed staring at the glow of my phone, waiting for a message that would never come the way I wanted it to, I began to realize that maybe choosing myself was the only way forward. The night I finally deleted the apps was not dramatic. There was no thunderstorm outside, no sudden epiphany that struck like lightning. It was quiet, almost ordinary. I was sitting on the couch with my phone in my hand, scrolling through the endless stream of faces and profiles that all felt like copies of each other. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes, bios written like advertisements, messages that started with hey and ended with nothing. It had become mechanical, like chewing food without taste, swallowing out of habit rather than hunger. And yet, a part of me kept swiping because it was easier than admitting how lonely I felt. But that night, the weight of it all pressed down harder than before. Every swipe reminded me of the night I had sat across from her, feeling something real, and the painful silence that had followed since. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about the way these apps had convinced me that love was something to be hunted, something to be won if I just tried hard enough. When all it had given me was exhaustion and doubt, I stared at her profile picture one last time, still saved in our chat history, her words polite but cold, the thread of conversation that had withered to nothing. My chest tightened, not because of her specifically but because of what she represented: hope, disappointment, the endless cycle I had let myself get trapped in. I thought about the countless hours I had spent pouring myself into messages, trying to sound interesting, trying to be seen, trying to prove I was worth someone's time. How many times had I stayed awake waiting for a reply that never came, twisting myself into knots over people who didn't even know me? I realized then that I wasn't just tired of her silence, I was tired of all of it. With a deep breath, I pressed the app until it wobbled, the little X hovering like a dare. My thumb trembled, hesitating, because deleting it felt like letting go of possibility. What if the next swipe had been the right one? What if I was giving up too soon? The fear whispered in my ear, but I pressed anyway, watching the icon disappear into nothing. One by one, I did the same with the rest, clearing them from my phone, erasing the endless loop I had been caught in for so long. When the last one was gone, my screen felt strangely bare, like a field after a storm has cleared away all the clutter. At first, I felt panic rise in my throat, as though I had cut off the only lifeline I had. But then, slowly, relief began to spread through me. My chest felt lighter, my breath steadier, as though I had finally set down a burden I didn't even realize I had been carrying. In the days that followed, I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, only to find the apps gone. At first, it left me restless, like a phantom itch I couldn't scratch. But as the hours turned into days, I noticed something else: space. Space in my mind, space in my heart. Without the constant pull of notifications, without the endless cycle of hoping and doubting, I began to hear myself more clearly. I picked up books I had left unread. I walked outside without checking my phone every few minutes. I called friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Slowly, I began to remember who I was outside of the search for someone else. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness crept back in, whispering that I had made a mistake, that I would end up alone forever, that I had thrown away my only chance at finding love. But instead of numbing it with swipes and shallow conversations, I sat with it. I wrote in my journal, I cried when I needed to, I let myself feel the ache without rushing to cover it up. And strangely, in facing it, the loneliness lost some of its power. It stopped being a monster lurking in the dark and became something softer, something I could hold and understand. I began to see that my worth was not tied to how quickly someone replied to my messages, or how many matches appeared on my screen. I began to believe, slowly and cautiously, that I deserved more than half-hearted attention, that I was worthy of love that didn't make me question myself every second. It was not a sudden transformation, but a steady one, like a wound healing day by day. Some mornings I still woke up with a heaviness in my chest, but other mornings I woke up with a quiet strength, a sense that I was moving towards something better even if I couldn't see it yet. One evening, I found myself sitting at the same cafe where I had met her, this time alone with a book in front of me. The smell of coffee filled the air, the hum of conversation wrapped around me, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel desperate for someone to walk through the door and save me from myself. I looked out the window, watching the soft glow of the streetlights, and felt a small, steady truth settle in my chest. Choosing myself was not the same as giving up on love. It was simply refusing to lose myself in the chase. It was finally understanding that love, when it came, would not demand I shrink or beg, it would feel like coming home. The weeks after deleting the apps unfolded in a way I didn't expect. At first, I thought I would feel emptier, like I had cut myself off from the only path to love. Instead, the quiet that followed gave me room to breathe. I no longer woke up to meaningless notifications, no longer spent nights wondering why someone had left me unread. Instead, I began waking up to myself. I noticed things I had been too distracted to see before, the way the morning light spilled across my kitchen table, the way the air felt on my skin when I took a long walk at dusk, the way music sounded fuller when I listened without the background buzz of anticipation for a message that would never come. Slowly, the world around me began to feel more alive, as though it had been waiting for me to look up and noticed. I started taking small steps toward myself again. I joined a local book club, not because I was searching for anyone, but because I missed the feeling of sharing stories. I went to a yoga class, awkward at first, but I laughed at myself instead of hiding. I reconnected with my sister, who told me she hadn't heard my voice sound so light in years. These little things stitched me back together, thread by thread, until I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. And in that living, something shifted. I no longer felt desperate for someone to fill the emptiness inside me, because slowly, piece by piece, I was filling it myself. There were still moments when I thought of her, of that first night that had felt so magical. Sometimes the memory stung, like pressing on a bruise, but over time it softened. She became less of a wound and more of a reminder, of what I wanted, of what I would no longer settle for, of the truth that I could feel deeply, even if it wasn't returned. Instead of bitterness, I found a kind of gratitude. Meeting her had shown me something about myself, that I was capable of connection, that I was still willing to risk my heart, even after all the disappointments. It wasn't her silence that defined me, but my courage to open up in the first place. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the park with a notebook, jotting down thoughts as children ran past and couples strolled hand in hand. For the first time, I didn't look at those couples with envy or a hollow ache in my chest. Instead, I smiled, recognizing that their joy didn't diminish mine. Love wasn't a competition or a scarce resource to be fought over, it was abundant, and it would find me when the time was right. I no longer needed to chase it through endless profiles or half-hearted conversations. It would come naturally, in its own way, when both hearts were ready. That realization felt like freedom. Not long after, a woman from the book club invited me for coffee. Her name was Claire. She was warm, with a laugh that seemed to bloom out of her effortlessly. We talked for hours about books, about dreams, about the silly things we did as kids. There was no pressure, no pretense, no sense of trying to impress or chase. It was easy, like breathing. As I walked home that day, I realized I hadn't thought once about how she felt about me or whether she would text me later. I had simply enjoyed being present. That, more than anything, told me I had grown. Love didn't need to be a desperate race, it could be a gentle unfolding. I didn't know where things with Claire would go, and for once, I didn't feel the need to define it immediately. What mattered was how I felt with her, seen, heard, comfortable. And what mattered even more was how I felt with myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to validate me, to prove I was worth loving. I already knew it. That night, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. I thought back to the girl I had been, the one glued to her phone, waiting for messages that never came, the one who measured her worth in swipes and replies. I whispered a quiet thank you to her, because she had carried me through the hardest parts. She had held on long enough for me to arrive here, stronger and softer at the same time. As I closed my eyes, I realized the apps weren't the problem and neither was she. The real shift had been in me, in learning to stop chasing and start living. In learning that love is not something you demand from others, but something you first grow within yourself. And in that moment, I understood something I had been searching for all along. I hadn't deleted the apps to give up on love, I had deleted them to finally make space for the love I truly deserved.